I'll be talking today about the applications of linguistics and psycholinguistics. Can you hear me well, just to check?
Yeah, it's all crystal clear.
Okay, great. To crisis management and crisis computing. You already presented me. However, just to say that I'm doing mostly applied interdisciplinary research, and this is one of my areas, one of the biggest areas actually. And why I'll be talking about linguistics and psycholinguistics, because both of them are dealing with how people communicate and how they understand each other. This is a very important topic in every situation, including in disaster situations and for crisis management. And it's obviously related to information management and communication strategies, but not in terms of what information should be shared, but how to best transmit or express the meaning to people and transmit the message. I'll be mentioning some application areas, some application examples from my research. All these examples are using methods and knowledge from linguistics, psycholinguistics, and crisis computing. I'll be talking about two different areas. One area concerns comprehensibility of emergency and disaster texts. I'll be talking mostly about English. So they're using both linguistics and psycholinguistics because we're talking about the language and about how this language is actually understood or not understood by the population. And there are two sub-projects in this area. One of them is the comprehensibility of emergency instructions, and the other one is the comprehensibility of social media posts of official channels during crises and disasters. The first project, the comprehensibility of emergency instructions, has been done during the Message project, which is a European-funded project between several European universities in France, UK, Poland, and Spain. It concerns psycholinguistics and linguistics, as I already said, and basically the problem which this research is solving. First is that when we express messages using natural language, we know that actually natural language is often complex and hard to understand. Sometimes it's ambiguous in terms of the language which is used. Although this varies from language to language, so you can have specific complexity and ambiguity in English and a different one maybe in Turkish. However, these phenomena are in all languages. And here I'm showing an example which is a little bit artificial. It's taken from a very famous book on psycholinguistics. However, it shows very well ambiguity in language. Police seeks orange attackers. So the problem here is the ambiguity in the relationship between the words orange and attackers. So are these attackers dressed in orange? Maybe they are somehow linked with an orange. Maybe they used oranges to attack. I know this is not the perfect example because it's a little bit artificial. And there is another artificial example, which I don't know if somebody of you know. I saw the man with the telescope, which is unclear in the terms of whether I used a telescope to see a man or I saw a man carrying a telescope or using it in some way. Well, this is one of the problems. Another problem is that although some readers can actually understand possibly almost every message, some other readers may not understand correctly. So they may have a specific psychical situation. For example, they may be tired or maybe drunk, or maybe they are simply foreigners and non-native speakers of the language in the country in which these messages are transmitted. So they don't know the specific expressions which are important for this domain. And obviously the technical terms, for example, are not known by most people. Our solution in this context is actually to investigate how understandable are emergency instructions and to propose writing rules or simplification rules for writing emergency instructions. So these writing or simplification rules, which are taken in the form of controlled language, have been developed for several languages during this project, specifically for French, English, Spanish, both Polish, and I worked a little bit on Bulgarian. As I said, every language has different ambiguity and complexity issues, so you have to work specifically for each language. A controlled language, what is a controlled language? I don't know if all of you know about this, but this is a subset of the natural language, artificial subset, which has some aspects of each restricted, so that to reduce ambiguity and complexity. And it usually, these limitations are related to what kind of words should be used, the lexicon, what kind of meanings these words should have, because some words are ambiguous, they have multiple meanings. and what kind of syntactic constructions are allowed. So for example, very complex long sentences are harder to understand, so it's better to avoid them. Well, controlled languages are usually used in technical manuals, for example, in the aerospace industry. However, they're also used in communicating between people. And when we talk about such writing rules, obviously we are talking about training experts beforehand, how to write these documents and what are the issues they should avoid. So they, at some point, start writing this naturally, like in another language. So when we talk about what rules to follow when we communicate with other people so that we want them to understand us, we should follow rules like write short sentences because they're easier to understand, avoid negation because negation is harder to understand from psycholinguistic point of view. And if you know, for example, if you say to a child, do not do that thing, the child usually will do it. So, you know, and also use simple words and write instructions in the logical order. This last one is actually quite logical, but my observations have showed that not all emergency instructions are written in a very logical order. I also ran some evaluation of these writing rules in terms of asking people to answer questions on text written in this way, to ask translators to translate them and see what happens. Is it faster, harder, etc. And also passing this text through a Google Translate, like a machine translation engine, so to see whether they're generating more errors or it somehow simplifies or eases the process. Why I asked why use machine translation? Because most translation agencies currently are usually using machine translation and then ask professional translators to correct it manually. Here I'm giving you some examples of what words are preferable to use. So I'm pretty sure that you understand that when you talk with lay people, it's better to avoid technical terms if you want them to understand you. So these are some examples taken from the company called Plain English Campaign. It's a British company in UK. Which is actually working on developing simplification rules or writing rules for simple documents. There is a similar company in the United States, and this is taken from their medical information guide, and basically they say for each word what kind of easy replacement should be used. So in case of amnesia, better to use loss of memory so that people understand you. And this is another example from the website of the Plain English Campaign. As I said, the complexity and ambiguity is usually typical for specific language. And here you see a very complex expression written for British English. If there are any points on which you require explanation or further particulars, we shall be glad to furnish such additional details as may be required by telephone. So this whole thing is simplified. It's rewritten in a much clearer way and sounds like this. If you have any questions, please phone. It's much easier to understand. And here I'm giving you some example rules from the controlled language, which I have developed for these situations. It's called Controlled Language for Crisis Management for English, CLCM. I'm showing two rules. You can see that each rule has a reference number, and then basically the rule is explained what needs to be done following the controlled language rules. That's why they look in this way. And then in red, it's written how we should not write, what should we avoid, and in green, how we should write instead. So the two rules here, one of them is that we should avoid abbreviations and acronyms, and this is done because some foreigners or non-native speakers may not understand them, for example. Or, and the second one is to avoid passive voice because passive voice is a problem from the psycholinguistic point of view. So instead of writing make sure 999 is called, it's better to write simply call 999. Here is an example of text which I have simplified according to these guidelines. So you can see there is a whole long sentence with lots of enumeration in it. Turn off all heating and air conditioning units and fans and close windows, doors and fireplace and wood stove dampers to help keep ash and gases from getting into your house. And there is a small explanation at the end. So basically the controlled language allows to write things in a more visible, more understandable way, and also to separate the instructions from the explanation. So the explanation is not really urgent to read, but if you want to read it, you know where to find it. So in terms of the evaluation of the controlled language for English, I said that I asked 100 participants actually to answer questions on this text written in this way under limited time, so to imitate somehow emergency situation. I know that this is actually not possible to be completely imitated in this situation. However, these participants had many different professions and were coming from different native languages, including from Turkish. And I also asked professional translators to translate written text following these instructions from English into Russian, Bulgarian, Slovenian, Spanish, Greek, Dutch, and Maltese, and also did the machine translation of the same languages. The evaluation results shown that all participants were actually giving, especially some of them, were actually giving much faster and more correct answers to the text written in this way, to the emergency instructions. And also, well, the manual translation was faster for some languages, Bulgarian, Slovenian, Spanish, and Maltese, while it was more or less the same for others. So I guess that it was because maybe some of these languages, for example, they were having cases like Dutch and Russian. And the machine translation errors, though, were easier and faster to correct for all languages, which was great because this would speed translation and it will be also more understandable for people. The controlled language was finally shared with the Sandwell Council in UK. And here on the right, you can see a curious image which shows the difference between male participants and female participants. In terms of how fast they replied to questions about the written texts and the original texts, which were, let's say, more complex. So as for the male participants, they were replying much faster to the texts which were rewritten in a simple way, and a little bit slower on the complex text. And this is a statistically significant difference. For some reason, the female participants, which were more or less 50-50, were replying in the opposite way. This is not a statistically significant difference. However, it's interesting to notice. We didn't investigate why this is happening. Maybe women just need more environment, more information in order to answer questions and understand what's going on, but we don't know. Well, the second project I wanted to talk about related to comprehensibility in this case is not about emergency instructions. It's about the social media posts which are posted by official channels in case of crisis and disasters. It's again related to understandability. There is also the term called readability in psycholinguistics, talking about which expressions are easy to understand and which are harder, and how to distinguish which text is easier to understand, easier to read, etc. What we did in this project was to take Twitter data from a large collection of tweets called CrisisLex T26, containing thousands of tweets from 26 different disasters of different types from different countries and different years. And we took a subset of them, for 500 tweets, which were containing useful information that was helping to understand the situation. Basically, this CrisisLex T26 have each tweet annotated in terms of whether it contains useful information, who posted it. In this case, we took messages posted by NGOs, media, and government, and also in terms of basically what kind of content they were containing. We will see the tags a little bit later. And each message, we asked 5 people to say whether it's clear enough or it was hard to understand, whether it needed some modification. And we used to hire people, we used Crowdflower platform, which is now called Figure 8. So these are the events in CrisisLex T26. I'm not posting all of them because obviously they cannot fit here and that's too much information. So you see there are different types of events. You have thousands of tweets from each event and different countries, and they were collected using a specific software called Aether, which I will be mentioning a little bit later. And here are the CrisisLex tweet labels, so they can be informative. The tweets can be informative or non-informative. For example, they contain humor, or they can be posted by NGOs, government, media, eyewitnesses, business, and outsiders. And there are different content categories, which are shown here on the right: affected individuals, infrastructure and utilities, donation and volunteering, caution and advice, sympathy and emotional support, and other useful information. So when we studied these tweets, we have discovered the following readability and comprehensibility issues with them. Some of them were related to psycholinguistics and also to the previous project. So for example, use of unfamiliar words, long sentences, The use of acronyms and abbreviations were also said by the people who actually read them that they were not understandable. And also using impersonal style. So instead of saying evacuate immediately, it was written police calling for immediate evacuation. Now, this is understandable, however, not so immediately by lay population. Also, some of the issues were Twitter related. So for example, excessive use of hashtags, text choppiness, and misspellings. Our investigation also showed that most of the tweets were actually quite clear, but some needed some slight improvement, and people suggested how to rewrite them, and some were very unclear. And I'm showing you here examples of the very clear messages. You see they're coming from different events, they're posted by media and government. Here, the confidence level actually means how many of the people actually express their opinions about this very clear or not clear label. It's calculated automatically by the platform. And you can see the second one, for example, Colorado flooding doesn't stop postal service. It's actually quite clear also to us. And here are examples of very unclear tweets, which is the first one, and a tweet which needs slight improvement, so can be easily rewritten, and it's also more understandable than the first one. You can see more examples actually in our paper, and I'm sharing all the publications and resources and websites at the end of this presentation, so you can actually access them and have a look at them after. We also showed, we have seen the following linguistic characteristics of very clear and unclear tweets. First of all, it was an interesting, surprising issue to discover that actually, although it's considered that short sentences are easier to understand, the very clear tweets were usually longer than the very unclear ones in terms of number of characters. Also, the very unclear ones were containing many more acronyms, mentions. However, the very clear ones were mostly containing URLs, and this wasn't a problem for the readers. And also the very unclear ones were having many hashtags, and especially hashtags in the beginning. So the tweets which were having hashtags in the beginning were considered not so readable and understandable by readers. And we ended up suggesting some writing suggestions for clear tweets. Obviously, experts have to be trained to write in this way before, and also be exposed to the ambiguity issues of language. So first of all, about the message length, it should, basically the message should include a maximum of 1 or 2 main points per tweet. To write brief sentences, however, they should be complete, so express a complete idea. Remove unnecessary words, and so we gave also suggestions about the vocabulary use, so to use only simple and familiar words and avoid acronyms and abbreviations. We already saw why. So about the Twitter specific elements, the suggestions were to write a maximum of 2 hashtags, to place all hashtags at the end of the tweet so people are not distracted, and to avoid mentions. The second application area, so after I talked about the comprehensibility of texts in the emergency and disaster area, the second application area is actually a tool or a resource for extracting appropriate crisis information from social media. In this case, we are using more linguistics and crisis computing, and we are not using almost any psycholinguistics. What I'm talking about is actually a linguistic resource which contains a large number of expressions in English, which are very frequently encountered in tweets which reflect specific aspects of disasters and crisis situations. And these expressions are over 7,000. They were reflecting the actual use in Twitter in 2015, so probably it can be updated right now, but you can still use it. And they can be used for both manual and automatic search, including for machine learning methods of relevant crisis messages in Twitter. For example, you can write these expressions in the Twitter search, or using the Aider. Aider, it's a specific software developed by QCRI, Qatar Computing Research Institute, so you can use it by inputting keywords, and then the machine learning algorithms are getting you tweets on the topics which you are interested in. However, you should check Aider to see what are their updates. It can be used for free and specifically for disaster situations. So to show you some example categories, first of all, how we collected the terms, we collected them from more events than Crisis selects 26. So we collected them from 35 events and from 2 different years. We use the following methods of collection. First, we started with a subset of these terms, which were collected by a crisis manager. Then we used some machine learning approach, and then we did this in order to collect a lot of similar terms from all the events. And then we did several rounds of manual filtering by a linguist and also again by Crowdflower workers as the same platform which we used in the previous research. The categories, also we revised the categories of the terms, so we didn't use the same categories as in Crisis Lex T26, so we made them much more detailed and we modified them a little bit. And I'm showing you here the example categories which we used for each term. So they are divided in groups. So one group are the categories which are typical for the ADER classifiers, and you can see that they are modified version of Crisis Lex T26. They are talking about caution and advice, injured people, dead people, infrastructure damage, etc. And you can see their description on the right. And here are other examples of terms, of categories of terms. The second group of categories of terms is taken from the United Nations Humanitarian Cluster Systems, and they are this from C1 to C08, concerning children and education, food and nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, etc. And finally, we defined 4 other categories, which are our own, and they were related to the weather, to the response agencies in place already. Eventually, if some witnesses accounts made it through the, I said that we have selected NGOs, official media, and government posts. However, maybe some witnesses accounts were cited by those, so we put a category on that, and also impact of the crisis. And basically, here I'm showing you some examples from this resource. The link to the resource can be found at the end of this presentation. And this is, by the way, the last slide. And you can actually download the resource and you can see that the resource is composed in the same way. It's actually in a CSV format, but you have the terms. So this document can actually be opened with Excel for those who don't know how to open it. And you can see that you have in the first column the terms, in the second column the category which is associated with them, and we usually give an example to it so that you can see how these terms are used in context and what you can actually find in this situation. What you can find, of course, you have to experiment with them and see what you retrieve. However, this is an example. And in some cases, some expressions are including a number, and we put a placeholder for it called number. However, if you're searching manually, you should actually remove this number, this same number, because it will not work, but it will work if you use it in a certain way in automatic methods. So for example, number flea wildfire, you can see an example here, 32,000 flea wildfire in Colorado. You can see extreme rainfall from the weather conditions. Flooding from extreme rainfall is a hazard for O&2. Emergency in Alberta should be a call to get, etc. Army deployed, responses for present. This is response agencies present in the crisis situation, and you have the example Pakistan Army deployed for earthquake rescue operations. At the end, you have missing, the word missing, and its category is missing found or trapped people. Now, of course, you may say that there also animals can be missing and other things. However, somehow it works very well for people. And you have the example dozen missing in the last tweet at the end. So basically, thank you for your attention. Let me know if you have any questions. And here at the end of this presentation, I'm giving all the links and publications which I mentioned, including the links to the resources and to the projects which I mentioned. I'll share it after the end of this presentation.